What if the past isn't behind us? What if it's beneath us, locked in vaults of stone and silence? Beneath the weight of history, there lies a quieter truth, one not written in textbooks, nor carved in marble, but buried, abandoned, and forgotten. This is not the story we've been taught. It is the story we've been denied. Across deserts, jungles, and mountains, faint echoes emerge of civilizations lost, not just to time, but to intent, discoveries sealed behind concrete. Artifacts pulled from public view, researchers silenced, reputations erased, findings labeled too dangerous, too impossible, or too disruptive. Each generation believes it lives at the peak of knowledge, only to realize that progress is often just a rediscovery of something far older, and yet patterns persist. Whispers of electric lights flickering under ancient cities, metallic machines beneath sacred monuments, astronomical computers in the dust of forgotten observatories. Could it be that humanity has risen and fallen more than once? That we are not the first to reach the stars with our minds? In 1993, a team scanning beneath the Sphinx found something metallic, alive with energy. 100 years earlier, human fossils were found in rock millions of years old, a finding erased from scientific memory. From skulls that speak in the language of light to stones carved with mathematics we barely understand today, these stories are not fictions. They are fragments of a history that doesn't fit, and so it's been hidden. But this is not a story about conspiracies. It's about curiosity. It's about the spaces between the known and the forgotten, and the people who dared to explore them. This series is not here to shock. It is here to ask, what if the real story of humanity is not a line, but a circle? As we follow the trail of lost discoveries, from the glowing libraries beneath Ecuador to ancient electrical grids in Baghdad, we're not just excavating artifacts, we're excavating memory. And memory, like truth, is fragile, but it survives. This is a journey through time, through questions left unanswered and evidence left unspoken. A cinematic reflection on what it means to seek the past when the past doesn't want to be found. History, wrote Orwell, is written by the winners, but what if the losers left clues in stone, crystal, and silence? And what if we finally listened? It started with a whisper from the earth, a signal beneath stone paws that had been still for 5,000 years. In 1993, beneath the sun-bleached limestone of the Giza Plateau, Japanese archaeologist Dr. Sakuji Yoshimura was not searching for headlines. He was searching for resonance, faint vibrations that might reveal chambers or voids hidden in the bedrock near the Great Sphinx. But what his radar uncovered was not a tomb. It was a riddle, a 30-meter metallic anomaly, symmetrical, structured, humming faintly beneath the Sphinx like a sleeping engine from another age. Not natural, not ordinary, and not supposed to be there. The object had internal compartments, geometric precision, materials that defied categorization. His data suggested a metal alloy unknown to any historical period, showing isotopes that don't naturally occur on Earth. And strangest of all, it was active. Energy pulses streamed upward, measured in electromagnetic waves that followed no known geological pattern. They echoed sequences found only in the equations of quantum physics. And then the silence came. Within 48 hours, Yoshimura was stripped of his permits. His equipment was seized. His findings were sealed. He was escorted from Egypt, warned to speak no more. But not before his scans had already reached colleagues in Japan, scientists who confirmed what he'd seen. A buried structure, engineered, functional. When he tried to publish, journals balked. The evidence was too extraordinary. His funding vanished. Colleagues withdrew support, some quietly admitting pressure from higher channels. Documents later leaked under Freedom of Information laws would reveal CIA surveillance and diplomatic coordination to suppress the discovery. The stated reason? Preservation. The real one? Narrative control. Satellite images from the mid-90s show freshly poured concrete near the Sphinx, sealing off access points that once led underground. Egypt declared the area off-limits for archaeological research, citing conservation. But something remains down there. Recent geophysical studies still register energy beneath the monument, consistent, patterned, alive. What then is the Sphinx machine? Was it a remnant of an unknown civilization, a relic from a forgotten epoch of human advancement, or perhaps something else entirely? Not man-made, but something humanity once found, understood, and buried. Technology, Clark once said, indistinguishable from magic, is merely the past we've forgotten. The Sphinx has always watched silently across the sands, but perhaps the real mystery lies not in what it sees, but what lies beneath it, still pulsing after thousands of years, and maybe still waiting. What happens when bones tell a story the textbooks refuse to hear? In the dry, sun-baked rock of Monte Hermoso, Argentina, 1880, geologist Dr. Carlos Ameghino brushed away the dust of ages and uncovered something that should not have been there, a human skeleton, complete, modern, unmistakably like us. But the layer of rock in which it lay had already told its story, 25 million years old. 24 million years before Homo sapiens was supposed to exist, before upright man, before tools, before language. The bones were clean, intact, and buried deep within geological layers untouched by disturbance. Ameghino, cautious but astonished, documented everything. Stratigraphy confirmed the age. Colleagues verified the find. The fossil, he insisted, was real. The discovery was published. Briefly. Then came the erasure. Academic journals retracted the papers. The official line was contamination or misidentification. But no alternate evidence was ever offered. Independent verification from British paleontologist Arthur Smith Woodward, who found similar remains nearby, was classified by the British Museum and never released. The bones, their existence inconvenient, were quietly stored in private collections, inaccessible to further study. Museums declined to exhibit them. Universities refused funding. Researchers who probed too deeply were silenced with reputational ruin. Later leaked correspondence revealed internal messages between European institutions. The tone was not of scientific debate, but strategy. This challenges the accepted timeline, could cause confusion, must be removed from public discourse. DNA analysis performed decades later on preserved tissue samples showed something extraordinary: 99.7% similarity to modern humans. Not early ancestors, not cousins, us, modern humans, living millions of years before we were supposed to walk the earth. It wasn't just the bones. Tools were found, artifacts, things made by hands, human hands, crafted with intention, with skill, with knowledge. What does that mean for the story of us? Did modern humans exist before history even began recording itself? Or are we a species that has risen, fallen, and risen again, over and over, only to forget each time? The past, one philosopher wrote, isn't just behind us. Sometimes it's buried beneath a truth we're afraid to remember. So what if the real question isn't how old are we, but how many times have we started over? Some artifacts are too perfect, not in beauty, but in purpose. In the jungles of Central America, between 1924 and 1927, explorer Frederick Mitchell Hedges and his team unearthed something shimmering, silent, and utterly unexplainable: a crystal skull carved from a single block of quartz. Soon more appeared, 13 in total, discovered in Maya and Aztec ruins. But these were not tourist trinkets. They were impossibilities. Each skull was sculpted with molecular precision. No tool marks, no fractures, no errors. The quartz itself was shaped against its axis, something that, even today, would shatter under the pressure of conventional carving. The technology required to create them? We still don't possess it, and yet they existed. Dr. Anna Mitchell Hedges, the explorer's daughter, observed something even stranger. Under full-spectrum light, the skulls projected images, maps, formulas, and symbols. Not decoration, but information. Layers of encoded knowledge embedded within the crystal. When one was studied at Hewlett-Packard Laboratories in 1970, researchers were stunned. The carving exceeded the capability of diamond-tipped tools. The quartz structure had somehow been softened and reformed. No one could replicate it, not even close. But it wasn't just the craftsmanship. The skulls emitted electrical fields. When exposed to heat or pressure, they generated patterns, complex, mathematical, and resonant. Some believe they were designed to store or transmit data, like ancient computers carved in stone. And when arranged in certain patterns, the skulls interacted, creating electromagnetic fields, altering nearby electronics, and generating sound phenomena that resembled digital communication. Whispers spread of governments confiscating the skulls, of museum records disappearing, of researchers warned into silence. Internal memos from major institutions revealed directives to remove anomalous artifacts from public display pending reclassification. Some skulls vanished entirely, transferred to unnamed facilities. Why? Because the skulls suggested something unthinkable, that ancient civilizations not only possessed technology we associate with modern science, but embedded it into objects as art, story, and code. Embedded it, and maybe left it behind on purpose. Quartz remembers, one engineer said. It holds a frequency. If someone knew how to program it, what would they say? Perhaps the crystal skulls aren't just relics. Perhaps they are messages, not from another world, but from another time. A time we've forgotten, a time that remembered us. Buried beneath centuries of sand and story was a current still waiting to flow. In 1936, amid the ruins of ancient Baghdad, German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig discovered something strange. Small ceramic jars, each containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod. Today, we call them the Baghdad batteries, devices capable of generating electric charge, crafted nearly 2,000 years before the modern battery was invented. But that was just the beginning. As Koenig dug deeper into the layers of time, he found more than isolated artifacts. He found a grid, copper wires, ceramic insulators, junction boxes embedded in the earth, a network, not a theory, suggesting that electricity had once coursed through an entire ancient city. It wasn't just functional, it was sophisticated. The cables were arranged in parallel runs, insulated precisely, and displayed oxidation patterns that only occur with prolonged current flow. The switches were made from alloys unknown to ancient metallurgy. The design mirrored modern electrical distribution systems, only more efficient, more elegant, and far more mysterious. And then came silence. Iraqi authorities revoked Koenig's permits. His photographs and notes were seized. The dig site was sealed, then concreted over. Officially, nothing had been found. But traces of the truth remained. British electrical engineer R.A. Ford examined fragments from Koenig's discovery and confirmed the unthinkable. This was no symbolic arrangement of materials. It was infrastructure. A working electrical grid, potentially city-wide, powered by mechanisms still unknown to us. Some believe it was wireless. Leaked documents later hinted that the Baghdad system may have employed principles Nikola Tesla dreamed of: resonant energy, electromagnetic transmission, even directed fields. Technology modern engineers still struggle to perfect, already operational in a world we thought primitive. So what power source fed this ancient grid? Deep beneath Baghdad, magnetic anomalies still flicker in survey data, signatures too regular to be natural, structures buried and lost, or hidden. Artifacts once sent to museums have since vanished. Collections were reorganized. Items were misplaced. Requests for information are now met with blank denials or redacted documents. Not everything that was lost is ancient, one investigator wrote. Some truths are buried on purpose. If Koenig's discovery is real, and the evidence says it was, then history must bend. Not forward, but back. Back to a time when electricity hummed beneath stone streets, when unknown engineers lit a city now covered in silence, when power flowed not just through wires, but across time, waiting to be remembered. The ground doesn't lie, it only waits to be heard. Between 1890 and 1920, across the rolling plains of the American Midwest, farmers, railroad workers, and archaeologists began uncovering skeletons. Not of mammoths, not of myth, of men. But these men stood 8, 10, even 12 feet tall. Buried beneath mounds and hills, they rested in tombs fitted to their frame, with tools, armor, and weapons sized to match. Their skulls bore no deformity, their limbs no signs of disease. These weren't aberrations, they were a people, a forgotten one. Newspapers documented these findings. The New York Times, Chicago Tribune, Washington Post, all carried the same story. Giants had once walked this land. Universities dispatched teams. Entire cities were uncovered, their architecture scaled for a race that seemed almost mythical in size. Doorways towering, beds oversized, seats too large for modern use. But soon the story began to vanish. The Smithsonian Institution, at the time considered the foremost guardian of American history, began collecting the remains. Crates of bones, skulls twice the size of ours, tools forged from advanced alloys. And then, silence. Researchers who pressed further found their funding cut. Careers stalled, reports retracted. When questioned, the official response was always the same: anomalous specimens, not suitable for public display. But private letters later revealed a different truth. Internal memos discussed the challenge these giants posed to prevailing theories, to anthropology, to history, to identity itself. If these beings existed, it meant our narrative of early North America was incomplete, or worse, deliberately rewritten. Modern attempts to locate the remains have failed. Inventory records from the 1920s list over 17,000 large skeletal artifacts held in storage. Today, the Smithsonian denies any such collection ever existed. Freedom of Information Act requests are denied or redacted beyond recognition. Yet sightings continue. Remote excavations occasionally uncover oversized bones, only to have sites closed under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. A law intended to preserve dignity, but now used to permanently rebury evidence before scientific analysis can begin. Were these giants a separate human lineage? Survivors of an older epoch? Older, or something else? A civilization erased not by time, but by policy? What do we lose when we shrink our past to fit our comfort? The ground remembers. The bones may be hidden, but the footprints remain, too wide, too deep, and too many to ignore. What if the laws of the universe were written once before, not on paper, but in stone? In the barren silence of Chile's Atacama Desert, where even time seems to dry and crack beneath the sun, a collection of carved stones was found in 1961. Archaeologist Charles Berlitz documented them, over 2,000 in total, each etched with markings that, at first glance, seemed ornamental. But these were not symbols of worship or art. They were equations. Not just recognizable patterns, but full mathematical systems. Expressions of quantum mechanics, relativity, atomic structures. Carved not with mysticism, but with knowledge, scientific, specific, and far ahead of its time. Star charts mapped with uncanny precision. Tables of elements, including some that hadn't even been discovered by modern chemistry. Diagrams resembling circuitry. Drawings of what appeared to be energy devices and propulsion systems. Physicists at MIT who analyzed the inscriptions concluded that the stones demonstrated not only understanding of advanced theories, but insight into unsolved scientific problems that modern science is still wrestling with today. How could such knowledge exist in a place so ancient? In hands we've labeled primitive? And then the stones were gone. The Chilean government declared them state secrets. Berlitz's research was seized, his notes confiscated. He was banned from re-entering the country. International requests to study the artifacts were denied under the guise of cultural protection. But behind the scenes, the concern was not about exploitation, it was about disruption. Leaked government documents admitted as much. The stones, it said, contained information incompatible with current historical and scientific frameworks. In other words, they didn't fit. And because they didn't fit, they were buried again, this time behind concrete, fences, and classified files. Satellite imagery later revealed the original discovery site had been repurposed into a military zone. The perimeter was guarded. The stones, officials claimed, had been relocated for preservation. No location was ever given. What civilization had carved them? What knowledge had they held and passed on in quartz and basalt? Were they survivors of a lost world, or messengers from an earlier chapter of our own? Truth leaves marks, Berlitz once wrote, even when we close our eyes. The Atacama stones remain silent now, but the math carved into their surfaces still speaks to those who dare to look and listen. What if the greatest library ever built was never meant to be read, only rediscovered? Deep beneath the forested floor of Ecuador's Taos cave system in 1976, Scottish explorer Stan Hall found something that defied reason. A library, but not of paper and parchment. A vault of metal books, over 5,000 volumes, meticulously stacked and stored. Each book was crafted from gold, silver, or alloys that shimmered with strange hues, flexible as paper, yet solid as steel. Their pages bore symbols from dozens of languages, some familiar, others never seen before. Words that formed no known alphabet, scripts that followed no earthly grammar. But when the right light touched them, the pages seemed to respond. Hall and his team documented intricate diagrams, blueprints for machines, astronomical data, complex algorithms. Some of the texts described events that had not yet occurred, political upheavals, discoveries, even future technologies. Many of them, impossibly, came true. It was more than history, it was prophecy. And then, as quickly as it had surfaced, the story vanished. Ecuadorian authorities declared the site off-limits. The caves were sealed, access revoked. Military personnel replaced explorers. The librarium and its promise disappeared into official silence. Attempts to analyze the materials were thwarted. Cameras malfunctioned. Samples taken for study were intercepted at airports. Researchers were forced to sign silence agreements. International negotiations for academic access were stonewalled. Preservation, they claimed, but documents later leaked revealed a different concern. The texts were considered too destabilizing. Oxford linguists who glimpsed fragments confirmed the scripts represented sophisticated, rule-based languages, possibly more advanced than any ancient system known. But their origin was unknown. Their purpose? Still unclear. Why would a civilization invest so much in indestructible books? Books that spoke of science, memory, and futures yet to pass. And who wrote them? If we knew what they knew, Hall once asked, what would we become? Today, the entrance to the cave is guarded. Sensors line the paths. Official statements say the books never existed. But those who were there, who saw them, touched them, remember. The forbidden library remains hidden, not because it wasn't real, but because it was. We once looked up and saw more than stars. We saw patterns and built machines to follow them. In 1953, deep in the remote reaches of Mongolia's Gobi Desert, a Soviet archaeological team led by Dr. Yuri Petrov made a discovery that never made it into textbooks or even footnotes. They unearthed the remains of an ancient observatory. Not a temple, not a shrine. A machine. Scattered across the desert floor were over 200 bronze devices, gears, armatures, dials, many of them still locked in precise calibration. These weren't decorative, they were computational, designed to track celestial bodies, predict eclipses, and calculate planetary positions with precision not matched until the invention of atomic clocks. At the center of it all stood a mechanical computer, far more sophisticated than the Antikythera mechanism once hailed as the oldest analog computer. This one could model planetary alignment centuries into the past and the future. It worked, not by approximation, but by engineering so exact that its gear ratios reflected mathematical constants still used in modern orbital mechanics. But the wonder didn't last. As soon as word of the find reached Moscow, the Soviet government intervened. The site was sealed, research was classified. Dr. Petrov was reassigned to unrelated projects, silenced not with violence but with paperwork. The devices, once catalogued in scientific journals, vanished into secret repositories, their discovery erased. When foreign archaeologists asked about the observatory, they were told no such project had ever existed. Petrov's own notes were redacted. But leaked photos told another story, of a civilization far older than assumed, crafting instruments with knowledge of trigonometry, logarithmic scaling, and orbital dynamics. Metallurgists confirmed the gears showed no signs of primitive casting. These were precision-machined components assembled with tolerances difficult to achieve even today. So who built them? And why did their knowledge vanish? Some believe the observatory was part of a global network, an ancient scientific civilization that once mapped the skies not with myth, but with mechanics. Others wonder if such knowledge was cyclical, discovered, forgotten, rediscovered, and erased again. We think we invented the future, a historian once mused, but maybe we just forgot it. The Gobi Observatory is gone now, paved over by concrete, ringed with sensors, buried beneath silence. But perhaps its machines still tick, somewhere beneath the sand, waiting for someone to look up and remember. We see the pyramids as monuments to the dead, but what if they were machines for the living? Between 1935 and 1942, beneath the most iconic structure of the ancient world, French archaeologist Émile Barre discovered something that changed his understanding of Egypt, and perhaps ours. Not sarcophagi, not treasures, machinery. Deep beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza, Barre uncovered a vast underground complex. Its walls were inscribed not with mythology or royal decree, but with technical schematics, equations, engineering diagrams, operational instructions. The chambers housed precision components, gears, pistons, channels designed for fluid dynamics. Some elements were still operational. At the heart of it, a chamber powered by forces that defied explanation, a system that generated electricity using principles of electromagnetic induction. It produced energy, cleanly, silently, endlessly. And yet, you've never heard of it. When Barre attempted to bring samples to Europe for analysis, Egyptian authorities intervened. His permits were revoked, his materials confiscated. The entire complex was declared a structural hazard and sealed behind concrete barriers. The story didn't end there. British engineer Robert Bauval reviewed Barre's documentation before it disappeared. He confirmed that the components showed sophistication equal to modern hydraulic and electrical engineering. Systems built with redundancies, fail-safes, precision control. The hieroglyphs weren't religious, they were scientific. They described magnetic fields, fluid pressures, load balancing. Some even speculated that the pyramid itself had once functioned as a resonance generator, converting Earth's natural vibrations into usable power. But none of this made it into academic journals, not because it was disproven, but because it was ignored. To accept Barr's discovery would mean rethinking not only Egypt's past, but humanity's path. It would suggest that the greatest feat of ancient architecture wasn't a tomb, but a machine. Leaked documents revealed high-level meetings within Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities and European institutions. The concern? That the site's true nature could disrupt not just tourism, but trust in the linear narrative of human progress. If the ancients had power, one official wrote, then we've merely reclaimed, not invented our modern world. Independent radar scans decades later revealed metallic densities beneath the pyramid still emitting low-frequency electromagnetic pulses. Something beneath remains, active. But the dig site is off-limits. The records, gone. The truth, buried. The Great Pyramid still stands, still puzzles, still inspires. But beneath its shadow, deeper truths lie hidden, truths that suggest we once understood far more than we do now. And then, we forgot. The rainforest hides many things, life, decay, secrets, but sometimes it hides cities. In 1967, American archaeologist Dr. Richard Thompson ventured deep into the Amazon in search of cultural artifacts. What he found was something far larger, evidence of civilizations, not scattered tribes or stone ruins, but thriving organized societies, urban grids, irrigation systems, medical tools, and scientific knowledge that rivaled, and in many ways exceeded, what Europe had achieved at the same time. Thompson's excavations revealed metallurgical technologies, advanced botanical engineering, and medical practices rooted in deep empirical understanding. He found documents etched into bark, stone, and metal, describing mathematics that included the concept of zero, complex geometries, and an understanding of astronomical cycles. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was a civilization. And then it was classified. The sites were shuttered, his permits revoked. The research, once supported by global academic institutions, was seized and sealed under national security provisions. Officially, the reason given was protection of indigenous heritage. But internally, documents told another story. There was fear that the evidence undermined the colonial narrative, the myth that Western civilization had brought science, law, and medicine to a primitive world. Because Thompson's findings told a different story, that the so-called primitives had already built sustainable, democratic societies. That their cities didn't sprawl over nature. They worked with it. Linguistic experts found that the languages spoken by these civilizations contained sophisticated philosophical concepts, terms for environmental balance, social justice, and systemic governance. Their legal systems allowed for representation, community participation, and even early forms of restorative justice, long before those ideas reached modern Western courts. But when Thompson tried to publish, his manuscripts were declined. His career stalled, and the sites? Bulldozed, deforested, reburied beneath corporate farms and oil infrastructure. Today, satellite imagery shows geometric patterns, straight lines, circles, even city grids, in parts of the jungle still unexplored on foot. But even these images are dismissed as natural formations or logging tracks. Indigenous leaders have long spoken of the ancestors, not mythical figures, but engineers, healers, astronomers. Their oral traditions align with what Thompson found. And yet they too are ignored. What we call undeveloped may simply be unremembered, one of Thompson's field notes reads, or worse, deliberately erased. The jungle doesn't just grow, it absorbs, it protects, and in doing so, it preserves. But the real loss may not be the buried stones or forgotten words. It's the possibility that a civilization once built a blueprint for how to live with balance, and we chose not to follow it. When enough truths are buried, they don't disappear. They align. From the Sahara to the Amazon, from desert vaults to jungle ruins, one pattern emerges, not of coincidence, but of choreography. A global sequence of discovery and disappearance. 10 major archaeological finds. 10 stories of silence. Each began the same way: a credible scientist, a groundbreaking discovery, evidence of civilizations older, wiser, more advanced than history allowed. And then, the same arc repeated. Permissions revoked, artifacts seized, publications blocked, careers dismantled. The pattern is impossible to ignore. Dr. Sakuji Yoshimura and the humming device beneath the Sphinx. Dr. Amegino's human fossils older than our species, the crystal skulls carved with impossible precision. Baghdad's forgotten electrical grid, the towering skeletons sealed from study, the stones etched with quantum mathematics, the metal books of Tayo's cave, the mechanical observatory wiped from Soviet records, the power system beneath the Great Pyramid, the rainforest cities designed for harmony, not conquest. Each find was isolated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. And yet the response was identical: suppression. Governments, institutions, museums, textbook publishers, scientific journals, all moved not to explore, but to erase. Why? Not because the evidence lacked rigor. In many cases it was overwhelming, but because it challenged the linear myth of progress. The idea that we are the pinnacle, that we began in caves and climbed steadily into light. These discoveries suggest something far less comfortable: that civilization is not a straight line, but a circle; that knowledge is not accumulated, but recovered; that the ruins beneath our feet may not be remnants of the primitive, but blueprints of the future. It raises a quiet, haunting question. What if the true story of humanity is one of amnesia? A society is not only defined by what it remembers, one anthropologist said, but by what it chooses to forget. And if that's true, then maybe we haven't lost these truths at all. Maybe we've hidden them. We stare into the past like it's a distant shore, but sometimes the reflection staring back is our own. Look closely, not at the ruins, but at the rhythm. A machine buried beneath the Sphinx, still humming. Human bones sealed in rock 25 million years old. Skulls that hold the secrets of light. Stone equations that outpace our best physics. Libraries beneath the earth. Power grids older than our wars. They weren't scattered accidents. They were echoes of something we once were, and may still be. Across every culture, every continent, there are stories of floods, of fire, of great knowledge lost. Not myths, perhaps, not metaphors, but memories, buried in the collective dream of humanity. We are told history began in Mesopotamia, but what if that was only the latest chapter, not the first? What if history is less a staircase and more a wheel? We rise, we fall, we forget, and then we begin again. This is not a story about conspiracy. It's about curiosity, about the quiet courage of those who see beyond the curtain and ask simply, what if we're wrong? Not to destroy the past, but to expand it, because truth, even hidden, leaves a shape, a pattern, a pull. And some still follow it: archaeologists, scientists, storytellers, listeners. People like you. You were never meant to believe all of this. You were meant to wonder. The greatest discovery, said a physicist once, is not a fact, but the permission to question. So let this be your permission: to question the timelines, to listen to forgotten voices, to imagine that what lies beneath our feet is not a secret to fear, but a story we were born to remember. The future is not built from scratch. It's built from memory. And memory, even when buried, finds its way back to the light.